Hey college football fans, welcome to episode 40 of Walk It Off with Chappy. This is episode number 3 in our triple header here from the ACC on the 4th of July. So once again, happy Independence Day to everybody. And we did our team that's red, we did our white, and now we've got our blue, as in Carolina blue, the North Carolina Tar Heels. And they had a relatively disappointing season in 2021, going 6-7. And you know who was saying "I told you so" the loudest? It was Mack Brown to his own players, his own team, and basically to the media. And he had a fear that all that preseason hype last year could catch up to him, and there was a chance that maybe his team wasn't mature enough, wasn't ready yet. Well, they're out to prove that that was last year. In 2022, they are much more mature, they're much more prepared, and they're ready for dogfights in the ACC this year. So how's it going to look in 2022? Well, let's start on the offensive side. They have one of the better offensive minds, Phil Longo, and even though they lose Sam Howell and they lose Ty Chandler at running back, things still look pretty good for you UNC fans, because Drake May or Jacoby Criswell, one of those two, is going to solidify and play a pretty good quarterback position. Now, conventional wisdom suggests that it's going to be Drake May, who was a one-time University of Alabama commit. He looked pretty good in the spring, but I got to tell you, for my money, if I had to choose a starter right now based on what I saw this spring, it would be Jacoby Criswell. He throws a good ball. He reads defenses pretty well. He throws a good deep ball. He's got some good zip on his passes. He's got some touch. And so while I think Drake May is still maturing and polishing off the rough edges, I think Criswell is a guy that you could see play in those early games. But I think by week 3, after they've played App State and Georgia State, both on the road, mind you, some tough Sun Belt Conference outs, I think we're going to know who's going to be the man heading the position under center in Chapel Hill. So at receiver, this is where they're relatively thin, and this is my big concern for UNC. Not a big concern, but this is a concern for UNC. So outside of Josh Downs, who is all ACC and is a very good candidate to be an All-American, preseason All-American, beyond that, they're relatively thin, like I said. And they lost some guys in the transfer portal, guys like Emory Simmons and Bo Corrales. Kind of head scratchers as to why they wanted to leave Chapel Hill to go to programs like Indiana, which I think is a step down relative to UNC. And then Corrales went to SMU, which is another semi-step down relative to the Tar Heels. I do like their incoming freshman Andre Green. Antoine Green is a good receiver as a number 2 to Downs, but I like their catalyst at tight end, primarily Bryson Nesbitt. I think he's going to be a mismatch for a lot of safeties and linebackers because he's bigger than a receiver in terms of size and stature, but he's also faster and more athletic than your traditional thick tight end. And then you team him with Kamari Morales, who was the primary starter at tight end last year. I think those two give him a good 1-2 punch. Also on the outside, Kobe Paysour and J.J. Jones are guys who will need to step up this year. Coaches have been high on Paysour ever since they recruited him. Didn't see a lot of time last year, but he's going to be counted on and expected to kind of step up as that number 3 or possibly number 2 receiver to complement Downs on the outside. In the backfield, British Brooks and DJ Jones return and are steady, but I'm keeping my eye out for Caleb Hood, who battled through injuries last year and was a highly touted running back recruit from last year's class. If given the opportunity this year, if he has health, I think that we could see some good things from him, as well as incoming freshman George Pettaway, who looked pretty good this spring. Now, the biggest concern on offense is an offensive line. This was not a very good group last year. They were pegged to be one of the better units in the conference, and that just wasn't the case. They were 120th in tackles for loss allowed nationally last year, and they were 127 out of 131, by the way, nationally in sacks allowed. So they've got to keep this new quarterback upright. They've got to keep him healthy. They've got to give him time to scan the field, look downfield, and make those throws, especially somebody like May, who does not have a lot of college experience yet. They did hire a new offensive line coach, Jack Bicknell Jr. Coach Mack Brown is raving about the addition of Bicknell to the staff and thinks that he will pay off solid dividends. And they did get Corey Gaynor, a multi-year starter from the University of Miami, through the transfer portal. Now, Brian Anderson is going into the season as pegged as the starter at center, but perhaps Gaynor could give him a push. And obviously, they're going to play the best man, and maybe one of those two can be competitive enough to slide out to one of those guard spots if the need arises. Defensively, this is where I'm more excited for UNC this year, mainly because they bring Gene Chizik to Chapel Hill. Now, Chizik was the D coordinator at the University of Texas when Mack Brown and the Horns in 2005 won the national championship. Chizik also won a national championship as a head coach at the University of Auburn, so he's used to winning. He knows what winning looks like. He knows what it takes. But especially on the defensive side of the ball, he was also a very successful D coordinator, I believe, at Iowa State before he went to Austin. And he's going to bring in this 4-3 defense, which takes care of the personnel that they have. I think that they've got potentially one of the deepest D-line rooms in the ACC Coastal, maybe even in the ACC. So that 4-man front now is going to make better opportunities for players like Desmond Evans and Javari Ritzie, Keyshawn Silver, Ra Taylor, and other guys. They're relatively deep on that front line, so I think that's going to bode well for them, and they should increase the havoc and pressure numbers from up front. At linebacker, they bring over Noah Taylor from University of Virginia, who in 3 years in Charlottesville, he averaged 9 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and 3 passes defended, and that's on average. Okay, so his numbers were pretty good, and he played quite a lot of snaps over there for UVA. Teaming him up with Cedric Gray, who coaches really liked going into last year, and he returns as a top tackler for the Tar Heel defense. And then Power Eccles, who's the son of Brian Eccles, former player at Michigan State under George Perlis back in the early 90s. Coaches really like what Eccles can do. He's a hitter. He flows really well sideline to sideline, makes good reads. And then also they have Chris Collins coming back, an outside linebacker type, who is a smart player and can help in pass defense as well. Speaking of pass defense, this is where North Carolina should be fairly stout as well. 2 strong corners in Storm Duck and Tony Grimes, not to mention their safeties, Cameron Kelly, Giovanni Biggers, Jaquarius Conley, and they have Dre Bly coaching the corners, but they brought in Charlton Warren, who was the defensive coordinator at the University of Indiana. He's going to be coaching the secondary and primarily the safety. So those 2 guys working together, along with Gene Chizik from up top, I think is going to help out that secondary. It's going to help that defense, and they're going to need to. Now, we said that North Carolina went 6-7 last year, but of those 7 losses, 3 came by less than 7 points. So there was a opportunity that they were an 8, maybe even a 9-win team last year, but just couldn't close the deal in the end of some of those games. So how does their schedule look in 2022? Well, they start off with Florida A&M. Good to see that they're scheduling some of these HBCU programs, but then they have 2 back-to-back tough matchups against Sun Belt teams, Appalachian State and Georgia State, both of them on the road, going to Boone and then going to Atlanta to play the Georgia State Panthers. Then they get a bye before they travel to Notre Dame, where they are 1-20 all-time against the Irish. So history really lopsided against the Tar Heels in that one. They they play Notre Dame at home. They host Virginia Tech, where they are only 3-9 since 2010, so they have not fared well against the Hokies. And if you remember, that was the opener last year in Blacksburg, where the 10th ranked Tar Heels came crashing down, and we kind of saw that it was not going to be signs of a good year for North Carolina. Then after the Hokies, they travel to Miami, where they've won 3 straight. They've beaten Miami 3 straight times. They play at Duke, a team who they've beaten 11 straight times in the battle for the victory bell, so it looks like they'll keep it painted Carolina blue. Then they have another bye week before hosting Pittsburgh. Now this is an interesting matchup because Pittsburgh, some people are picking them to repeat as Coastal champs. This series has been close. The last 10 meetings have all been decided by less than 7 points. That's unbelievable. I mean, a team that they play really every year, and it's been a one-score game in the last 10 matchups. Very rarely do you see that happening. They travel to Virginia, then they play at Wake Forest, a team that Mack Brown is 11-3 against. Then they come home to play Georgia Tech and close out the year hosting the very highly touted NC State Wolfpack, a team that the Tar Heels are 2-3 against in the last 5 meetings, but that would certainly go a long way to making fans not only of Mack Brown content with where he's at, but it'll certainly make Tar Heel fans happy because it will likely be a highly ranked NC State team coming into Chapel Hill in a big finale. And if you recall last year's game between the Tar Heels and the Wolfpack, that was a classic. So how do I see it? I see this going down as an 8-4 season for North Carolina. I think that they finish 3rd in the Coastal Division. So I think we're going to see them kind of work their way back up. There's a chance that they might steal 1 or 2, and I wouldn't be surprised to see North Carolina battling for that Coastal title into November if they take care of things, if they get solid quarterback play, if that offensive line corrects itself under new coach Jack Bicknell Jr., and if that defense comes alive and rallies and plays well under Gene Chizik, which I expect that they will. So that's my thought on the UNC Tar Heels. And again, a happy 4th of July to you all. Let me know your thoughts. Hit me back with questions or comments. And thanks for watching. I'm Chappy, and this is what I know.